when you make drinks because we have to grind beans. So, without any further ado, I want to introduce Jeff. I've gotten to know Jeff personally over the past few months here at the coffee shop. He's a daily staple here. We've even named a drink after him. You should, you should ask him about that. I named it the El Jefe, so come and order at El Jefe and just be surprised if you don't know what it is. So, Jeff is going to talk about his story tonight of living with a traumatic brain injury and what has come out of his life, the positive things, and even some of the negative things that have come out of the accident that he had, and a little bit of his life before, and how his life was transformed after his brain injury. Jeff has a book coming out in November. Is that right, Jeff?
Yeah.
Coming out in November called Finding Normal. So, without any further ado, I want to introduce to everybody Jeff Huxford.
I'm right here with that. Yeah, so thanks for the introduction, Spencer. And yeah, try the El Jefe. You will not be disappointed. So, have you ever wished for some kind of powerful story to unfold in your normal, everyday, mundane life? I'm talking about the kind of story where something happens to you and you're changed in a major way. A story you just had to tell other people because you believe if they heard it, it might change them too. I always wanted a story like that to tell, but I didn't think I would ever have one. Well, guess what? I thought wrong. Because this evening, I'm here to tell you all about my life-changing story. But before I start, I want to explain how I'm going to be telling it. And I always expected an impactful story like the one I just described would be easy for me to remember. It would be something I could just tell from memory. Or maybe I would just need a few notes jotted down in front of me to keep me on track. Unfortunately, that's just not the case with me. Because of memory problems and some other issues I have due to my brain injury, I don't have the ability nor the confidence to do this, at least not yet. So that's why tonight, if it's okay with everyone here, I'm just going to read my story to you. So in 2003, I received my medical degree from the Indiana University School of Medicine. And my wife and I had both lived in Indiana our entire lives, but after graduating from med school, we got married and we decided we want to try living someplace different. So we chose to move to the beautiful mountains of East Tennessee. And that's where I began a 3-year family practice residency in the city of Bristol. We moved back to Indiana shortly after I finished up there. So when I moved back to Indiana, that's when I started my first, I guess we could call it real job as a doctor, which would also, unfortunately, end up being my last. And this was in my wife's hometown of DeMont, which is just about an hour south of Chicago. I was working in a small family practice clinic with 2 other doctors and then 1 nurse practitioner. So I quickly became quite comfortable being one of the docs in this small rural farming community. And I felt like I was pretty successful as I quickly grew a rather large and loyal patient base. And I really enjoyed my job. And I thought I found my niche, my purpose. I was doing what I felt called to do. I felt like it was what I was supposed to do. It was what I went to school for, it's what I trained for, and it's what I envisioned myself doing for the rest of my life. Unbeknownst to me, major changes were just up the road, and I mean that literally. So I'd been in practice for 6 years when my life and my entire family's life was changed in an instant, in the blink of an eye, and it was changed forever. And as soon as you hear about that, as you'll soon hear all about, I never saw it coming. So on the morning of May 3rd, 2012, I was driving my truck through the intersection of a 4-way flashing red light, just a couple miles from my house. At the same time, another unseen truck traveling 60 miles per hour failed to stop, and it hit me and slammed me into a concrete utility pole. This resulted in my head going through the driver's side window. So my head went through the driver's side window and struck the pole, causing my most significant and permanent injury, a severe traumatic brain injury. So I was trapped in my truck and had to be cut out by rescue workers. was flown by helicopter to a level 3 trauma center just outside of Chicago. The emergency personnel were working that day really didn't think I was going to survive. In fact, it's kind of an unusual thing. I had the chance to talk with the paramedic that took care of me that day. And he said there were several times that day he thought he had, in his words, he thought he had lost me. I'm not sure exactly what that means, but he thought he'd lost me. But as you can see, I wasn't lost. And so God performed a miracle and saved my life that day. People that drove by the scene of the accident thought for sure that whoever was in my truck hadn't survived. But I was alive. And after saving my life, God performed another miracle by healing my body and my brain to an extent most everyone predicted was impossible. You have to understand, based on the severity of my brain injury, doctors said I would never return to practicing medicine. But I did, and this was just after 5 short months. In fact, doctors still can't understand how I'm able to do many of the things I'm still doing. For example, things like tonight, like speaking in front of people. They're just not sure how I'm functioning as well as I am. But I truly believe what happened next would be the most amazing part of my story. Because not long after the miracle of my life being saved, my brain being healed, God performed another one and changed my heart. And this changed me and my life more than anything, even more than my brain injury. And I could really talk about this part of my story all night, but I really want you all to get a chance to hear my friend Becca's music, so I think you're really going to love it. But if you are interested in hearing more of my story, you can check out my blog. I have a blog at jeffhuxford.com. Spencer's got some cards back there on there, and you can check out. He can get those to you. So yeah, sorry for the shameless plug there on my blog. I had to slide in there somewhere. But I am going to spend some time telling you how my medical career came to an abrupt end, and this is kind of how I ended up doing this. So it was January of 2016, so about a year and a half ago. Now, I'd been back to work as a doctor at the time for 3 years following my accident, and I'd recently cut back on my hours slightly. But other than that, I really thought I was doing pretty well. And then one day, I had to call off work, and I had to go to the ER for a pretty bad headache. While I was there, the doctors ordered an MRI of my brain. And then I followed up with my neurologist a couple of days after that to go over the results. And I found out some surprising news regarding my health and my future. So when I was at the appointment, the doctor he showed and explained to me that when comparing the new MRI with the old, my brain was actually showing evidence of shrinking. At this time, I wasn't yet making any medical mistakes. I felt like I was still practicing pretty good medicine. But because of the MRI findings and some of the new symptoms I was starting to have, he wanted me to retire immediately. And again, this was in January of 2016. So when this happened, I was pretty shocked. I kind of pretty much resigned to the fact that I'd be working at a much slower pace and I would have a lesser patient load for the rest of my career. But I was really confident I'd work for many more years. So the fact that I suddenly couldn't be a doctor led to many questions to which I didn't have really any answers. So that's when I just began asking God a lot of these questions. And questions like, okay, God, sorry. What lesson are you trying to teach me now? That's better. So like, okay, God, what lessons are you trying to teach me now? What's next? Is there something else I'm supposed to do? Well, as always, God was listening, and he soon started giving me many of the answers I was searching for. I felt like God was telling me he wanted me to share my story to help people. He wanted to use my story to point people to him. But I started to quickly became frustrated with this because the times I felt like I was supposed to share my story with people, I had complications from my brain injury, and it was making it difficult to get the right words out. I didn't feel like I was making any sense when I was telling people. So, because of my struggles, I just would choose not to say anything at all. But when I did this, it just didn't sit well with me. I really felt like I was holding back on what God was calling me to do. So, as a way to deal with this, I started writing, or I guess you call it journaling, just about the journey God had been taking me on following my brain injury. And you have to understand this. I know you didn't know it before, but journaling is something I wouldn't have even considered before. I wasn't a writer, and I didn't read books. I was more of a math science person, and the writing and reading really didn't interest me. I'm actually finding, though, that I'm doing a lot of things now that I never used to do. And I've learned that this is pretty common after a brain injury. But despite how strange it seemed for me to journal, I really enjoyed it, and it seemed to be helping me, so I just continued with that. And eventually, I felt like it was just time to share what I was writing with other people. So I felt like God was telling me that time that He'd give me this story, and I wasn't supposed to keep it to myself. I wasn't supposed to write my story out on paper, or in my case, a computer, just to make myself feel better. It was a story I was supposed to share with other people who may be going through something similar to mine. So in the fall of 2016, I decided to start up a blog, which I call Finding Normal. When I first started doing this, I really had no idea what I was doing. I had no idea to set up a blog. I really didn't know what a blog even was. But I learned quickly what that was, and as I started doing that, it's really seemed to be working out for me, so I just kept doing it. And so this was like soon after I started the blog. That's when me and my family and I, we moved down to Tennessee for a variety of reasons, but that's when we made the decision to move here to Franklin. Yeah, and actually, I think we actually moved here almost exactly 1 year ago today. And since I've been down here, I have written a book called Finding Normal, like Spencer mentioned, which should be out later this year in November. And I have most recently started doing some speaking, kind of like what I'm doing here tonight, and giving that a try. There you go. So, I would like to end my talk tonight with another story. It's really just a small part of the grander story God is writing for my life, but it's a story I think is pretty important, and it's one I believe is it's pretty incredible, really, because I think it pointed to what was about to take place in my life. So this is what happened. We were at our house. Me and my wife led a small group from our church back home, and we were at our house leading that small group, and we were all taking turns sharing our testimonies, sitting around in a circle, sharing our testimonies, sharing our stories. And my wife told me something I had said that night, and it's something I don't remember saying, but my wife told me that this is something I said. She said I expressed my almost frustration to the group over my lack of a testimony or something that could make an impact on the person I'm telling the story to. I was explaining to them I felt my story was fairly atypical or mundane, boring, whatever term you want to use. I just really feel like I didn't even want to hear it. I really feel like they didn't get anything from it. It would just be pointless for me to share what I thought was a pretty boring story with anyone. So in front of my small group that night, I actually wished for a more powerful story. And 1 week later is when my accident happened, after I made this wish. And I just felt like this was as if God was saying to me, oh, here you go, here's the kind of story that you wish for. And it wasn't long before God started asking me, now that I gave you this story, what are you going to do with it? So I guess that's what I'm trying to do now. I'm trying to do something with it. I'm trying to tell my story on my blog and in my book and now by speaking. But I want you to know that, please understand this, I'm not doing this for any personal attention. I'm telling my story with the sole purpose of pointing people to God, the one who's the true author. The God who saved my life, the God who changed my heart, and the God who's teaching me how to truly live. Ever since the night I uttered those words of frustration to my group over my lack of a story, I think I've learned an important truth. That's certainly a truth that I wish would have required a near-death experience and a life-altering brain injury for me to understand. But the truth is this. We don't need some type of dramatic story to have an effect on other people. Because long before that day, I already had a story to tell. I just didn't realize it yet. I think we all have a story to tell. Despite what we tend to believe and what the world tries to tell us, our stories don't need some sort of emotionally driven plot line to have an effect on other people. In fact, our stories were never meant to be about us. and the simple story of living a selfless life, glorifying and pointing people to Jesus is always worth telling. So I just encourage you to leave here and go tell your story. And I will thank you all for listening to mine. Thank you for being a good audience. So now I'm going to introduce